Labour has overturned two huge Conservative majorities to win by-elections in Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth. Speaking in Tamworth this morning, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer reflected on an historic night.
This is an incredible night in politics, an incredible morning, an incredible result here for so many reasons. It is clear that the voters here have turned their back on a failed Tory government. They've had enough of the decline of the last 13 years and they are crying out for change, positive change that the Labour Party can bring them.
Alistair Strathern, the newly elected Labour MP for Mid-Bedfordshire, says the result shows nowhere is off limits. But just how excited should Labour be? How much stock should we put in by-election results? Do we do so at our peril? Joining me now in the studio, polling guru extraordinaire, Professor Sir John Curtice. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming in. And also joining me, Labour Party historian David Cogan and former Conservative advisor Charlie Rowley. Gentlemen all, I welcome you to the programme. It's terrific to have you here. Let's start with Sir John, obviously. Now, this could seem seismic, especially if you listen to Keir Starmer talking about an historic night and what a big, enormous political, historical moment this really is. But is it? Do we often get by-election results that might be misleading?
Sometimes, yes. But we now have to remember that this is beginning to be part of a pattern. So apart from the two by-elections in which we've got swings over 20% that were counted last night, we also, of course, had the Selby and Ainsty by-election back in July, which also had a 24% swing. And in a sense, we've been left in the wake of those July by-elections asking ourselves whether Selby was indeed the guide to where we were at, or whether, in fact, the Uxbridge by-election was only a 7% swing was the guide. Well, I think we now know the answer. It was Selby. Now, of course, you can't just read by-elections on their own in complete vacuum. We read them alongside the fact that the national opinion polls at the moment show, yes, not as big a swing to Labour, but the truth is we don't expect by-elections to exactly match the national polls. Typically, governments find by-elections more difficult, but the 14 to 15 point swing is very substantial. And given that it's the national swing, these kinds of swings in by-elections are to that extent at least not surprising. And now, the last time we saw swings of this size with any degree of regularity was before the 1997 general election. And every Conservative remembers what happens in 1997.
Yes, we do. And people do. And if people haven't regularly visited Mid-Bedfordshire or Tamworth, one of the crucial issues here is that they have been considered traditionally to be Tory heartland seats.
Well, Mid-Bedfordshire, yes, not Tamworth.
So tell us a bit about that.
Well, they're rather different. So let's start with Tamworth.
Yes.
Tamworth was actually a constituency that historically didn't always quite vote for the winning party, but certainly in 1966 did, in October 1974 did, and did from 1997 through to 2010. However, it's a constituency where Labour's vote has been in long-term decline during the course of the last 20 years or so, and it's also a constituency that voted 66% for Leave. In other words, it had many of the attributes in terms of the trend in the Labour vote, the size of the Leave vote in the EU referendum that we associate with the red wall seats, even though technically it wasn't a red wall seat. So the fact that Labour could get a record swing in a constituency like this obviously is particularly something that Labour will take particular delight in. Mid-Bedfordshire, in contrast, is a seat that's been Conservative since 1931.
Wow.
Labour have never won the seat. In fact, the Liberal Democrats were second a few elections back in 2001, 2005, which is one of the reasons why, for the first time, Labour and Liberal Democrats could not agree with each other as to who should focus on the seat. There was a concern that as a result they would split the opposition vote because voters wouldn't necessarily be clear which of them was better able to defeat the Conservatives in a way that's not true in Selby or Somerton and Frome, which the Liberal Democrats won, etc. In the end, enough people voted Labour, though I think it has to be said, it is only 34%. Mid-Bedfordshire isn't as obviously a stupendous performance for Labour in the way that Tamworth is, but even so, at the end of the day, they won, and they won then on the back of a 20% swing, largely a product of the fact that, we had a near record fall in the Conservative vote.
Just minutes before we went on air, the Prime Minister, who's in Egypt at the moment, spoke about the by-election results, and he said something along the lines of, well, by-election results are very heavily influenced by local factors. And in this instance, you might say, well, the local factors have been fairly dramatic, fairly dynamic.
Yes.
We have, obviously Nadine Dorries of this parish.
Yes.
And there was a big expose of her in the Telegraph a couple of days ago saying her surgery premises were closed down in 2020 and she wasn't seen or heard to have held any kind of surgery ever since. She said she was stepping down with immediate effect, which she then didn't do. All of that. And Chris Pincher, we know about Chris Pincher too, don't we?
Well, indeed. And of course, we know there are one thing that the two of them, Mr. Pincher and Ms. Dorries, share in common, and that is a close association with Boris Johnson.
That's right, yes.
And one of the problems that the Conservative Party still has is that people have not necessarily forgiven the party for the allegations about Partygate during the lockdown, and then, of course, the fact that ultimately the House of Commons ruled that he had misled the House. The truth is, yes, there is a history there which is particularly intense locally, but actually the national polling also shows that this is one of the problems that the Conservative Party has to overcome. So yes, to that extent at least, even then, even in the local circumstances, there is a wider message for the Conservative Party.
So I am going to bring my other guests in, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Would it be sensible, feasible? Would it be something that would make any kind of viable sense to think or conclude on the basis of these two results that really the Conservative Party ought to abandon hope, that there would be nothing they could do? I mean, there have been all these grandstanding speeches recently, so many of them, they've made headlines, we've reported on them endlessly. We've got bullying of Excel, not the bullying, the banning of Excel, bullied dogs, the changing of A-levels completely. I'm trying to think of all the other ones, ban all the boats. I mean, there have been many, many speeches, haven't there? And Suella Braverman, multiculturalism isn't working.
And virtually nothing's happened.
Rishi Sunak saying multiculturalism is working. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff going on and an awful lot said. But is it really simply gas and guff just disappearing on the ether because really they are doomed, whatever they say and pretty much whatever they do?
Well, no political party is ever going to give up hope, and you can never say that a party is definitely doomed. What we can say, I think, is that the Conservative Party is in as much of an electoral hole now as it was a year before the 1997 election, and they have to try to avoid history repeating itself. But what could they do? Well, the things that we know that are really bringing them down, well, apart from Boris Johnson, who's already mentioned, one, the economy, and, of course, the fact that the Conservative Party is blamed for the state of the economy because of what Liz Truss did. And secondly, the state of the health service. In a sense, the Conservatives' problem is that a lot of people are saying, can I afford to feed my kids? And if I get ill, will I get treatment in due time? And until the Conservatives can stop people thinking along those lines, they're going to be in trouble.
Thank you very much indeed. Professor Sir John Curtice there was the definitive voice on these matters. Very pleased and honoured to have him sitting and bestriding my sofa like a colossus. Lovely to see you. Let's bring in